Hello, everyone. All right. I'm going to give everybody time to gather, get your last bits of drink and food, get libations, all the things. All right. So welcome. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second Constitutional Conversations Town Hall session. Thank you for being here with us in the green room of the War Memorial. I'm Ralph Remington. I'm Director of Cultural Affairs, and I'll be one of your co-moderators this evening. I am joined by Paul Henderson, who's Executive Director of the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability. And we are joined by a wonderful group of panelists who will be introducing in just a few minutes. But before we begin, I'd like to first start out by reading our land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Arts Commission acknowledges that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. I'm going to have some general housekeeping announcements. So please take note of your nearest emergency exits, which can be found to either side of the stage, the same entrances you came into the green room. That's where they'll be. And bathrooms are located just outside and down the hall. Women's and unisex restrooms are down the left hallway when exiting the green room, and the men's restroom is down the right hallway. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the panelists for tonight's session. To my left, Chuck Collins, San Francisco Arts Commission President and lawyer. Carolina Aranabar Fernandez, Director of Galleries and Public Programs, and an amazing artist. Mark Harris, an amazing artist. Jorge Rivas Jr., he's Executive Director of the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs. And a note for tonight that each of us are participating on this panel are speaking in our own personal capacity. Titles are being used for identification purposes only, but we are speaking in our personal capacity. Important to make that distinction. Not speaking for the city and county of San Francisco, but for Ralph Remington, Chuck Collins, and so on and so forth. All right. So, the Constitutional Conversation series overall is an opportunity for the city to host intergenerational conversations that engages San Francisco youth, artists, community members, and city leaders. As part of this series, we explore the meaning of the U.S. Constitution and its purpose, value, meaning, and impact, and explore the wider concept of culture of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Amendments 1 through 10, and 13, 14, and 15. Later on in our future conversations, we're going to talk about the Civil Rights Act. We're going to talk about the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We're going to talk about the ERA. We're going to talk about a lot of things, Second Amendment. So there's some interesting conversations coming down the line. So please stay tuned for that. And so tonight's town hall discussion is focused on the theme of the Reconstruction Amendments and their impacts on immigration and liberation, Amendments 13, 14, and 15. So the 13th Amendment was the abolition of slavery in 1865, and the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. I won't go into all of what it says, but that's basically the intent of the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is equal protection and granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including formerly enslaved people. It was brought about because slaves or enslaved people were not considered citizens of the United States. And so there had to be an amendment to make that happen. And I should point out, it was, we were talking about really the rights of men and not the rights of women. Women didn't get their full rights until decades later. And so that's important to bring an important distinction to draw here. In the 14th Amendment, it covered citizenship, it covered due process, equal protection, and apportionment. And the 15th Amendment was voting rights. So really, when the 14th Amendment came about, that granted citizenship. There really shouldn't have been a need for any other amendments after that, right? Because if you're a full citizen, you have the right to vote, you have the right to live where you want, you have the right to marry who you want, you have the right, presumably, right? So that should have taken care of it. But this being the United States of America, that's not the way we do things. So we have to do it all a la carte and do it over and over again. So with that, I'm going to hand it over for some opening remarks to my co-moderator, Paul Henderson, and then we'll get into some questions.
Great, thank you. Hey everyone, nice to see so many folks here. I want to start off by thanking all of you guys for being here in this illustrious panel, and also the folks that have signed up, our friends at the ABA that have joined us to have this conversation, to talk about the Constitution. You will notice that Ralph kind of stole my thunder already and told you what they were. That was my big reveal, to tell you what the constitutional amendments were, but I think it's really important that folks are coming here and that they're having this conversation right now. I think the context in terms of what's going on today and in modern times, it's the right time to remind ourselves and empower ourselves with what the Constitution says and how that gets interpreted these days. There is not a more important conversation now. And while there are attacks or shifts from our educational foundation of what we all know coming into this room, I think it's a great time to have the conversation that we're having right now to empower ourselves and the communities that value many of the civil rights and autonomies that have evolved out of the Constitution. And so it's a big deal, I think, to look out into an audience like this and to review and see how many people are watching this online and engaged in this conversation, because it's just that important. I will say, aside from the Constitution itself, I think an important approach to understanding the Constitution is having a clear understanding of the balancing of checks and balances in this country. And we all know, and I know you all know so much of this, but evaluating the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch is an important conversation that in many instances feels muted these days with those checks and balances. I'm a lawyer and I care about the rule of law and how it gets interpreted, the historical perspective of all of that, some of which we'll be talking about. The history of the amendments in the Constitution, I think, is ultimately important, and that reflects on what the obligation and the expectation of what our courts are going to do and what we expect them to do when we're talking about the Constitution. The federal courts, as you already know, can review the actions of the executive branch, and by defining the scope of the executive branch's decisions and authority, those are the checks and balances. I know we're going to have a lot of discussion today probably about executive orders, and just to give you all a little history there, for the most part, those executive orders have been administrative, usually, in the past, but not exclusively. Roosevelt issued over 3,700 executive orders. I know these are things that up until recently, many of us may not have paid too much attention to what these executive orders have been and how they get defined, but they can cover, as I said, a lot of it was administrative, but not at all times. The Emancipation Proclamation from Lincoln was an executive order, so it doesn't have to be administrative in nature. I think the real issue is trying to understand the balance, and this is an argument that has gone on since we've had executive orders, over what is legislative, which is exclusive authority given to Congress, versus policy, which is what executive orders are allowed to do. We've had over 100 in the current administration that have covered a number of things. I'm not going to read all of them, but I just wanted to flag some of the juicy ones as a foundation to the conversation that we're about to have. And you can just pick your favorite silently. You don't need to clap, but I'm
Choose
just
your
going
own
to tell
adventure.
you. Yeah, I'm just going to tell you a few of them that I think are really relevant. The withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement that includes a reversal from offshore drilling, ending all DEI programs and efforts from the government, including revoking the ban on government contractors to discriminate, so that's okay now. The firing of federal employees, the creation of the Department of Government Efficiencies to a non-elected head to evaluate governmental practices, the suspension of asylums for this country, the freezing of foreign aid, and a number of other practices. I just chose a couple of them. I know you guys are thinking, like, we've got some favorites we want to talk about, but these are some of the big ones by way of example of what some of the current executive executive orders are that are standing. There's also been an indication for things that haven't quite culminated in executive orders yet, with an indication to affect the Department of Education. That's something that you absolutely need Congress in order to move forward for, so those are things that I would be paying attention to. But even issues that we thought we had relied upon in the past have shifted with issues like abortion and death penalty. Right, those are still being reinterpreted and have changed recently, things that we need to pay attention to. I will say, as we begin the conversation, just so we have a framework and understanding of advocacy and challenging what the standards are for those checks and balances, there are generally two different methods. One of them is with Congress, who can legislatively overrule executive orders, and they can also defund executive orders. That is what they are empowered to do. From the judiciary, the courts can strike down executive orders on two bases. One, that the executive orders lack authority, and two, that those executive orders are unconstitutional. And that brings us back to the beginning of this conversation, because that authority is based in the 14th Amendment. And so I would be paying very close attention to some of the work that's happening right now, like with the folks that have been deported to Venezuela, and the interpretations of congressional authority. I think that's going to be very telling in terms of how the administration evaluates rulings from the Supreme Court and to the Supreme Court. It's going to give us a lot of answers. So there's so much to talk about. I know you all didn't need that little history lesson, but I just like to level set to make sure that everyone has the same understanding or a similar understanding of policies and interpretations. At the end of the day, we can't fix what we don't talk about. And you can't talk about what you don't know, and I don't like to presume things. And so having us be on the same page as we approach this conversation that shapes the pathway of how we understand, how we exist, how we resist, and how we advocate in our next steps, I think is ultimately important. I'm really honored and privileged to be up here on stage, and I can't wait to dive into the conversation of this very impressive panel that you guys are about to hear from this evening. So thank you all so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started. Ralph, back to you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Paul. So that was great, because it grounded us where we are and what we're talking about tonight. So the first question I want to put out, and I think I'm going to direct this to Jorge and then anyone else who wants to comment after that. In what ways do policies targeting specific immigrant communities challenge the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause?
Thank you, Ralph, for that question. Good evening, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'll start with a little bit about myself before I dive into the question. I am a son of immigrants. My parents were immigrant farm workers who came from Mexico, from the state of Zacatecas, and we used to do the journey back to Mexico every year at the end of the crop season. And when it comes to immigration, and when it comes to thinking about having access to the services, the resources, the privileges, it's very much of a personal issue to me. And thinking about the 14th Amendment and everything that I grew up having access to, I think about my own education, whether it was in high school in a small town of Los Baños in the Central Valley in California, thinking about the benefits and the privilege I had to go to Berkeley for undergrad and then grad school later in my life. I think about the benefit or the privilege I have of directing a city department now, and all those privileges that come that I've worked hard for, but also that I have access to. I feel like because of me and my parents having access to certain services and resources made it possible. So I'm an example of what can happen when we have access to some of those services and resources, but not everybody does. I know that it takes special people to be around your life in order to make that connection. I know that my parents didn't know how to access a business loan on their own, so they had to make sure that they can be connected to the right people to learn how to get access to that business loan so they can start a small business and move out of the farm work, the cycle of being a farm worker into owning their own small business. And that type of access, it is because of this promise of the 14th Amendment that we need to make sure that we are talking about now, because there are many services and resources that are not accessible to everybody, and we're seeing those being stripped away. We see that access to not only some of the government-funded or government-supported services are being stripped away, but also some of these immigration policies that we're seeing, people are retrieving and hiding and don't want to access the benefits and services that are available because of fear in their communities. So the big picture there is that other executive orders, other rules that are being placed are having indirect impact on the services that people want to access or reach out to or contribute to. I can go on for other things around like mass deportations. We are seeing, this idea that we should all have access to due process, to services, equal protection under the law, and we are seeing that being stripped away slowly. We saw that over the weekend, where I think, folks were being flown out of the country without the due process, without understanding why what was happening. So we're seeing more of that these days, and I think it's important for us to really recognize when that is happening, that's in front of us, and we're slowly, hopefully not, becoming desensitized to it. It's only been 8 weeks, and we are slowly retrieving because we're getting so much of that we are slowly retrieving from being outraged, being upset, angered by these types of actions that are happening on a daily basis now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Can I just add, just because you brought that up, but that equal protection, the issues that you brought up within the 14th Amendment, I think it's important to know that part of that extends beyond citizens, and the specific language prevents you from denying a person, specifically not identifying citizens, within the jurisdiction to the equal protection of the law. And I think that that's a really important issue that gets overlooked, but speaks directly to a lot of the things that you were raising. These are protections that are afforded because of the Constitution and the 14th Amendment before you get into an interpretation or a breakdown of whether or not a person is a citizen or not because they're in the jurisdiction of the country.
That's right. There's certain rules or certain rights that people have in the United States of America, regardless of being a citizen. As soon as a tourist lands in this country, they have certain rights. They don't abdicate their rights as people just because they landed in the country and they want to tour San Francisco. They still have rights as a person. So that's important to know. Carolyn.
I want to add something. First, thank you all for being here, and I want to reiterate that I'm speaking on my personal capacity. And I also want to just mention the names of incredible women who've been doing important work in all these amendments. And one is Ruthie Gilmer, Angela Davis, Jackie Wong, Bianca Tylek, and the amazing Patrice Coolers, Elisa Garza, and Paul Tometi, who I get language and knowledge from. So thank you all to the work that they're doing. I think we can't talk about this without talking about race and thinking who gets like the rights and who actually gets the policies. It's about race, it's about colorism, so it also depends where you're coming from, what you get. Like people coming from the border from Canada have different rights than people coming from the border from Mexico. So I just wanted to like bring up race in the conversation and how like the inequalities of what you get, it depends on what color you are and where you're coming from.
That's an important point because, we shouldn't lose the fact that America, the United States of America, was founded as a white racial state. It's a white racial state that then we had to fight, everybody else had to fight for the rights to have space in this white racial state. And so thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Collins, it seems like you had something on your mind.
Well, there's a lot on the table. I don't know what's in my mind right now. In really thinking about how Paul has given us a really strong framework for this conversation. When we study constitutional law, we look at this body of work, and in many ways it falls into these three different buckets. The Constitution of the United States is largely founded on the ability of white men to engage in interstate commerce. It's called the Commerce Clause. We even invented the Marines to protect our waterways around the world so that we could protect the trade that white men controlled in these colonies that became America. So the ownership of that then falls within our area of national defense. Who and what are we defending? And for whom are all of these resources put into play? The Constitution is a big book. It's an immense book in which so much goes on. But it's also the gatekeeper for a lot of the ways that we conduct ourselves. Periodically, something really good happens in the constitutional framework. In 1955, 54, 55, and 56, in the Brown versus Board of Education decisions, the headlines in the newspapers were "The majesty of the law was revealed." This is a big concept. This is what perhaps the framers of this Constitution, in their imperfect way, thought that we could figure out over time. Another big part of what is necessary to hold our constitutional framework in place is to understand that the population has to be educated. It was never envisioned that an ignorant body would control such a sacred document. We heard this in our presidential campaigns. We've heard about the importance of understanding that democracy is an experiment. It is not established, it is not permanent, and it is not assured. And so right now, as each one of our panelists have really opened up in this conversation, the norms of how we deal with our Constitution have changed. In fact, the notion of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were radical. How are you now opening up the book with due process so that everyone has that right? My youngest brother was born profoundly developmentally disabled, but in the state of California, he had profound rights under the Lanterman Act. The majesty of the law is revealed. And if we look at the 19th Amendment, the majesty of the law was revealed very late in our constitutional history and in the history of this country, so that women, imagine that a black man or an Asian man could have rights under the Constitution before women could. These are big gaps that have required successive amendments and an awakening of the importance that the Constitution is a living document. But what we're dealing with right now, and I think that Paul and Jorge called strong attention to this, is the norms have changed. The norms have changed in such a way that what we think the way that things should happen are not happening. But remember, there are three branches of government. As Paul said, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. But there is what we call the fourth estate. And the fourth estate is about, I think, what we're talking about here. It's the ability to use our First Amendment rights, our freedom of speech, but also the norms have changed with respect to the truth. And so we are in, as they say, uncharted waters. We have a constitutional framework. There are three branches of government. And with the assault on the press right now, I think is as important as any one of the single things that we're looking at. Because when we bury the truth, we begin to move into an area of description that we don't know about. And what I will say finally is remember, many of the young people today have grown up in this context, in this climate, and they don't know what it felt like when we had Barack Obama as the President of the United States. They will remember these times under this presidency because these are the foundational moments of their lives. And so what you have lost, the question is, how will we use our constitutional framework and the fourth estate to ensure that we do have freedom of information, that truth is something that has a scientific and a basis behind it, and that we're not really hiding behind the rhetoric of power and the corruption that that can breed and instill in the population. Thank you.
Thank you. So, a question for Mark Harris. Mark, what parallels do artists draw between Reconstruction era backlash and today's challenges to the civil rights movement?
Well, I think artists, particularly in the African American community, have always been the historians of this country, and have been, for lack of a better word, the soul of the country, right? And so, you know, I think about all of the great music from, you know, spirituals that were being sung out of rebellion, you know, plotting to get away, steal away, to, you know, blues music that was, you know, derived as a healing mechanism. You know, we've always been involved in I think human rights, expression, humanity, and the advantage that artists have, I think, over most other people who want to engage in what's going on is that you know, we're risk takers inherently, and so we're always pushing the envelope, or we're trying to, and you know, times like these just you know, they wake us up, they get us to create more in ways that we're able to take complex issues and distill them down so that they can be easily understood. And really, I think it's about motivation. You know, facts don't really move people, and we've seen that with Trump, who, you know, he can't spell fact, but he knows how to emote, you know, get emotion from people, and so. I think that, you know, artists are going to continue to do what we do. We're going to continue to see the world in ways that is different from everyone else. We're going to continue to put ourselves out there on the line, and it has a way of everyone else sort of like catching up. You know, when I think about Jimi Hendrix, Machine Gun, or you know, a lot of the other great music, even early hip hop music that was coming from a place of rebellion and reporting in a non-traditional way. I think it's just, you know, it's more fuel for us to do what we do.
Well, you had that amazing James Baldwin show downstairs in the gallery in Carolina, with Carolina, and I wanted to, I would just like to hear from you, and maybe even Carolina on this. Like, what lessons can we pull from James Baldwin in today's times and what we're going through right now? What would Baldwin say? You know, what would Baldwin do? WWBD, right? What would he do?
He'd drink some bourbon and tell you exactly how he felt. You know, I think for me, I'm a huge James Baldwin fan, and I think that he actually really struck the right tone between you know, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And I mean, just a tremendous role model for courage, in that, you know, he was fully himself at a time when it was much more dangerous than it is now. And he, you know, he walked away from a lot of what was familiar to him. He was a prodigy as a preacher. His dad was a preacher, and he was in the church very young, making people pass out, you know, in the black churches. And he kind of saw through it, and he left, and he went and he found his own voice in his own way. And I think what we can learn from him is that, you know, he realized how mixed we all are. And I love his quote of you know, when he challenges people to prove that they're white, you know. And that, you know, he knew that we couldn't replace one sort of ideology of supremacy with another. And I thought that was very interesting. And that he was able to take that position, you know, around a man like Malcolm X. I mean, that's, you know, you got some cojones to you know, to do that, but it also shows how intellectual Malcolm was and how different the time was and how people were willing to engage. You know, you go back and watch some of these old YouTube videos of people talking on television, and, you know, they're smoking a cigarette, and it's just so like genteel and like, you know, it's a pleasure to watch. And you know, and I think he really struck the right balance. You know, he knew that we're not going to make it without them. They aren't going to make it without us. And that it's really up to us to figure it out, or there won't be a republic. So I just think truth-telling, you know, being authentic, you know, taking risks, and passion. You know, he had it up to here with, you know, being black in America, and he almost killed someone one day because they wouldn't serve him, and then he left the country because he knew that like he needed that. But I would say just go back and read his words and listen to his countenance, and you know, and what he said is ringing true. You know, it's all really upon us.
As James Baldwin, some of you in the audience may not have ever read him before, and that's fine, but you need to get to know him, especially right now. Of course, he's passed away many years now. African-American activist, author, poet, provocateur, James Baldwin. We'll throw some stuff up on our website, the San Francisco Arts Commission, so you can, maybe some links where you can read Baldwin's work in connection with the moment that we're in. So, Carolina, you probably want to say something about this?
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking about Mark's curation at the gallery too, and how you know, James Baldwin also has opened doors for a lot of like people today, but also artists, and given like language, and just thinking about the relevancy of his words today, it's great, but it's also sad. You know, think how like we are on a similar, of course, with a lot more, but in a space that we still have to look at the issues that when he was writing, you know, and like he's talked about prisons, he's talked about like all these things that we have to revisit, and like he was already reimagining how, in a balanced way, how we could do different, and we haven't necessarily. So it's just like an inspiration for us to go back and just think of like, oh, maybe we haven't moved that far.
It's true. Thank you. I'm going to toss this to my co-moderator, Paul, because I know he has some questions in his quiver.
I literally was like, don't talk, because I was super excited. I love James Baldwin. I think he is brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm super excited that you started off the question by framing it with throwing it to Carolina and Mark as artists, and interpreting what advocacy looks like as a reflection of how James Baldwin lived his life and was intentional about articulating and defining ideas and thoughts of advocacy to his audience, and how artists do that themselves. And both of you have works that challenge stereotypes and exist as resistance, that exist as a presence that is part of an existence that I think is really important for this conversation. I was really excited that you started off with James Baldwin and the interpretation of that from the artists that are here talking about their work. And I think that that's really important. Those of you that may not have seen the work of these artists, I would encourage you to jot the names down and go and see it, because I think it's important. I love James Baldwin. I think he's a really important figure. One of the things that he talked about was our crowns that have been bought and paid for. All we have to do is wear it. That's a quote. I know I'm weird and I remember all these facts and statistics and quotes, but how I interpret that is almost as a double entendre, as a message, because so much of the things that he wrote about and so many of the things that he stood for and focused on was race. And I think he was speaking literally to communities of color and disenfranchised communities about the crowns that have been paid for from the suffering throughout history. But I think he was also talking to the broader audiences in this country specifically. He wrote both in French and English. He was fluent and great, super smart guy. Because I think what he was referencing are our crowns of freedom and our rights that we have all fought for here in this country, most of which have been defined throughout the Constitution. When we talk about the rights, I think he was referencing the rights of women. I think he was referencing rights for people of color and all disenfranchised communities. And quite frankly, in the context of this conversation, see how I'm going to circle this back and bring it back. In the context of this conversation, I believe the crown that he was referencing that we're supposed to wear, that we're supposed to fight for, that we're supposed to define, and that we're supposed to show, is in fact things like the Constitution. That is our crown. But how we choose to wear it and whether we choose to wear it is reinterpreted every time. And I think you guys just referenced that is how we choose to approach it and how we choose to defend it, how we choose to interpret it is the point of this conversation in the first place, because we do have the tools. I think Chuck was talking about that fourth estate, and that fourth estate is our own advocacy. How we employ, how we execute our own advocacy defines what our future looks like. And as frustrated as we get with the things that we see when we turn on the television and hear very handsome and smart people telling you how to interpret the news, we all have to make sure that we take those next steps ourselves to make sure that we are doing the things that we think are important, to make sure that we are saying something, that we are doing something, that we are taking the steps, that we're learning from other people about the implications. And it just makes me really proud and excited that part of that definition of articulating who we are as a country and what we stand for includes an interpretation and a definition and then inclusion of culture and the arts, because I think that's equally important to the conversation. I don't even know if I answered the question, but that's what I wanted to say.
That's great. Yeah. So when we look at the 13th Amendment, I think as I look at it, at least, Paul, I'm looking at the big miss and the most egregious part of the 13th Amendment. You probably think, well, what, Ralph, would you think was egregious about freeing slaves? You know, is that they excluded people that were criminally jailed or restricted. And prisoners, right. And what it did was, by excluding slavery except for the imprisoned population, what it did was it gave the system from the outset the excuse to find reasons to enslave people, right? To find reasons to criminalize people. So if we can criminalize these black men in this case, but black people in general, if we can criminalize them, then they don't have the rights. Then we can enslave them legally. All we have to do is figure out a way to criminalize them. So then came loitering laws and vagrancy laws and all of these laws that they, petty little misdemeanors that they then elevated to be able to enslave black men, to put them in the system so they could be in workhouses and work farms and turn out labor for free. Well, Paul, I know you have some comments on that one.
Okay, well, I'm not going to give you all a lecture, but let me throw out some very important things that I think are important. And again, you don't get to argue. These are things that are just fact. There are race disparities built into our criminal justice system. I know that's a shocker. It's just true. And so when we're talking about this issue of what slavery looks like in the context of prison and prison reform, or the lack of prison reform, I think we need to contemplate what role do we approach those issues while private prisons have had such a broad proliferation that was put on steroids and grew quite immensely from the first term of this current president that we have right now. And that made a big difference just in talking about it. And again, I'm not going to go into a deep dive, but I'm just going to flag a couple of things that I think are important to contextualize our understanding of what's happening with issues like that indentured servitude. So many of the folks, and this is broadly in a lot of the prisons that have indentured servitude or that allow people to work within prisons, and folks are paid a range of between 14 cents to 63 cents for their work. That's before 50% of their wages are garnished from those agencies. And we're talking about work that specifically here in California, like firefighting. These are things we're all familiar with, and let me just explain some of those differences. I like to have specific examples just to give context so you guys know what I'm talking about, but many of these people that are in those positions that are engaged in these practices while they are incarcerated are doing work that they aren't allowed to do once they leave and if they leave their facility. And here's another shocker. Many of the people, once they have been incarcerated They don't move to Germany or move away and live in Australia. They return back to their same communities that they came from. And once they return, they are restricted in terms of their access to education, housing, employment. There's like 6 or 7 things all across the board. But we really have to look at our systems in ways that applies the rights and privileges afforded through our Constitution in ways that are intentional for folks that have come into our mass prison population that has grown in this country. We are the most imprisoned population in the world. I was going to say in the United States, in the world, and that's a big deal. And raising that issue in the context of the Constitution, I think, is important, because what we believe the Constitution stands for is only as strong as us applying it to different interpretations, different groups, and I think it's really important that we talk specifically about disenfranchised groups, that we talk about racialized groups, that we talk about age groups, that we talk about gender groups, sexual orientation groups, and we talk about incarceration and the folks that are incarcerated and how they are treated, and what our expectation is for this population when they return back to our very own homes, our very own backyards, with a skill set that's been cultivated, and a dangerous skill set, a powerful skill set that can't be employed once people are released. I'm going to end with this, but here's a couple of ideas since you raised the issue. I was one of the chairs for reentry. I know a lot about these issues. I just want to leave you with a couple of the solutions, some of the bright spots, some of the smarter people than I think are talking about these issues with prison reforms and the indentured servitude and labor that takes place in prison, asking for there to be unfair rules applied and discriminatory practices applied to that labor because they're restricted and they're not. You don't have the same constitutional protections that other people do when you're incarcerated, that there be some sort of evaluative conversation about pay, commensurate pay. That doesn't exist either, which is why I told you what the wages were, and there should be some sort of comparison associated with both skill and risk in terms of what people are risking while they are engaging that type of work. That work needs to be voluntary, and there needs to be robust oversight in terms of safety protocols, which is not the case as well. If there are safety protocols for firefighters in the context of society, we need to apply those same protocols in terms of safety for the prisoners that we have doing the work. And then maybe contemplate not allowing agencies to exist that profit off of labor that they don't hire outside. If you can hire someone to do the work at these lower rates, you should be required to evaluate at least the people doing that exact same work once they've been released. And again, this goes back to the restrictions that we have in many of our states and local in this country that restrict reentry work and working with folks that have been in our criminal justice system. And that to me speaks to our own advocacy about ban the box and our lack of ban the box advocacy that exists in this country. And so I know that was a long way of answering the question, but you said prison and jails, and I've always got a lot to say about all these things. But I really think that that's important because as we talk about, and I think we have talked about, what is the approach of the Constitution for culture? What is the approach on the Constitution for race? What is the approach of the Constitution for persons, not necessarily citizens? And I think as we're defining or articulating what a disenfranchised community looks like, that we do a disservice to not address the reentry population. We do a disservice not to contemplate folks that have been incarcerated that have purportedly paid their debt to society, and that's before we unpack the race disparate outcome of the pipeline that is built specifically to take away the power and funnel folks of color and funnel women into marginalized and compromised situations in our criminal justice system that continues to be a challenge.
Thanks, Paul. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to open up the floor so that the audience can engage with the panel. And while I'm doing that, does anyone else have any comments based on Jorge?
I just want to kind of uplift a little bit of what Ralph said and around just, you know, the 13th Amendment and the parallels that exist in our current immigration system and the prison system that we have in place. And speaking to like the fourth element that we are becoming really normalizing just our reactions and what we're seeing, we are seeing a lot of detention centers that are being built very similar to prisons, even though immigrants are not criminals when they're detained or have not been found guilty or have whatever it may be. They're just being detained for unknown amount of process while they wait their hearing, if that's what they're waiting for, and mostly asylum seekers who are being detained. And we're seeing this investment from large corporations for building detention centers. We are also seeing—
For profit.
For profit, yes, of course. And then we're also seeing immigrants being exploited for their bodies being exploited for labor for minimal pay without necessarily being formally detained, right? Or being imprisoned, just detained. So we're seeing a lot of those parallels compared to our prison system and our immigration system. And even taking a step further back, I think, you know, there was, after the passage of the 13th Amendment, there was an intentional narrative that was built around Black men, in particular around the negative narrative around coming for your women, coming for your communities, coming for your jobs, and the criminalization of Black men was very part of the narrative that was built and intentionally built back then. And now we see that happening these days, where there's an intentional narrative being built about criminalizing immigrants, how they are here to take your jobs, they're here to, you know, destroy your community. So there's also parallels that are being that happened at that time that they're happening now. And I think I just want to call that as something that we are seeing today, and just to be aware of it as well. So
It's a great point. Yeah, get some sound. There we go. It's a great point. Paul, you should have a mic coming your way. We're going to fan out to the audience. And any questions that anyone may have, please, now's your time. Or comments. Yes.
Hi, Gerardo, and I'm wondering, what are your recommendations to address those issues that you were just talking about? The racial disparity, the criminalization of immigrants, etc. Like, what would be like actionable items that you would suggest to address those issues?
Wow,
Let me just jump in here. You know, first you have to identify the issue. Like, what is the issue that we are talking about? And the racialization of policy is something that goes all the way back deep in our history. And in a sense, it's the lost cause. The notion of whiteness in America has never been released. It's fundamental to what we are dealing with right now. This notion that we have actually gained ground is challengeable, because in spite of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and Reconstruction, we slipped into Jim Crow. We had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. In 1955, we had the abject murder of Emmett Till. And so the notion of blackness or people of color or women has never really been fully established in this country. We can talk about it through the prison pipeline. We can talk about it through health disparities. You know, who fought in the war in Vietnam? You know, people of color, people of poverty. And so the through line has been who has the power, and then also not to just rest in our fears, but we have fought through times like this before. Our ancestors had to pay a big price for us to sit here right now. We're sitting on privilege, And we also have to understand that we have to work in coalition. One of the things that Paul said earlier is that if we find the threads that are common among us, we can build a tapestry that has a lot of foundation and can get through this. But it's going to take us as women, as men, as people that are finding themselves in any one of the communities. You know, I don't think I have to recite what that means in each one of our own personhoods. That we see that we are in this together. And so what I was saying is we have to identify what the problem is and how it is that the system continues to perpetuate what it wants to do, which is capitalism. Privatization is about capitalism. And we mix these notions of a free market, that it is a rational system. And it's really not, because it's tailored for a specific outcome, and that is those who hold the power, which are largely white men, not only in this country, but as a hegemon in the world, are not going to relinquish that without others coming together and saying, we're going to displace this. We're going to stand for where we need to go into the future. There are a lot of old-fashioned techniques. You know, people think that you should boycott something for one day and that's going to cause change. No, that's just a little one-day market fluctuation. We have to get into coalition building around substantive areas where we can really see change.
Thank you. All right, hands, questions. Paul is on one side, I'm on the other. Okay, somebody here.
Thank you. I have a question for Paul. In regard to public health, what healthcare services do prisoners have, and once they get out of the prison system, what are their options? If you could inform us a bit about that.
Big question. But let me just tell you, felonies, infractions. I couldn't think of infractions. Those kind of things all impact what your access to health care is. There are also many of the pathways to health care are contingent on employment. So many of the definitions that we have for healthcare are defined by what our employment status is, because so many of our healthcare statuses are defined by the work that we do. And when you don't have employment, for example, your access is defined by many of the social services that are provided at a local, state, or federal level. And we have Obamacare. All of that is being challenged right now, but the interpretation of how that gets executed, how it gets funded, and how it's accessible is oftentimes determined by what state you're in and the level of funding that those services require for issues such as abortion, let's say. And there's a broad spectrum. But at some level, a lot of the access to that healthcare is determined at a very localized basis, and you may have access to different care in San Francisco that you could find in Riverside, let's say, for example. And so it's a big question, and it's almost a case-by-case example, but the implications of healthcare and access is defined by status, and that status includes the tags that I indicated before about the level of conviction that you're bringing to the table when you're talking about an incarceration process. But more importantly, it's defined by access to employment and the kind of jobs and benefits that are provided in the kind of job that you have are the benefits that aren't provided in the jobs that you have. I know that was a long way of answering the question, but it was a big question.
Thank you. Somebody?
Oh, yeah, I got you.
So I would direct this question to Chuck because he brought it up. I would like the panelists to talk more about what the fourth estate is, and because how like this is the SF Arts Commission and how like artists fit in that fourth estate, and yeah.
So, I'm sorry, so how artists fit into, well, I mean, again, I think we're free for one, you know, we're free agents. So, one of the things I think the reason we're in this situation is because we're all in this situation we've never been in before as a country. The amount of information, the amount of abundance, there are certain groups that have broken through a little bit, and I think that dilutes some of the power of community. I came here 25 years ago from Atlanta, and I learned a lot about what San Francisco used to be like versus what it looks like now. And I think the biggest thing that shook me about that was that all of this destruction of our community happened with absolutely zero representation on the Board of Supervisors. And we had our businesses, white people came to the Fillmore to hang out and shop, world-class musicians. And so I think that artists, we don't have the constraints of a professional athlete. I mean, look at what they did to Colin Kaepernick, or an actor even, who might want to be outspoken. We don't have that, right? We do what we do for free most of the time, right? I mean, I've been creating for 25 years, and most of that has been just because I've wanted to, because I've had to. And again, I think, we have a different set of skills, and not just visual artists, musicians, filmmakers, writers. I love Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I love the fact that he talks about that he comes from a tradition as a writer and as an artist, and that, I think Black people in this country have really been the engine of democracy. When we were emancipated, everywhere we went, people were like, "Oh shit! Like, what do we do about this now?" And so, and I think that when you're oppressed and when you're held down and when you're dealing with stuff, that you find ways to cope with it, and you get creative. And so, I guess to your point, none of the situation that we're in right now is going to come from us thinking the same way. We're going to have to get creative. And we see what the Republicans do. They get creative all the time. And we haven't somehow figured out how to match that. But I think this crisis is going to be a crisis of confidence, and I think people are going to start to, I say take a page from the Canadians, elbows up. I want to buy all Canadian merchandise now, But I think that they will be an example. I think that country has become galvanized behind what's happening. And Frederick Douglass once said that, you can't have a republic when you have two things: if you allow a privileged class, and if you allow a group to be disenfranchised. And we've had that for a long, long time. And it's all a game. They give us a bone, and then they take more back. And people are more distracted now than they've ever been, which is making it harder to have the nexus of getting people together. But I think that's where art comes in, right? I think, think about your favorite love song, or the song you turn on when you're really mad. You want to drive fast. It gets to you like right away. It cuts through everything in your life. A poem, a painting, a photograph. So I think that artists play a major role. I hope that San Francisco can continue to be a place where people like me have come and reinvented themselves and create. You know, I took an affront in 2012 when I saw all my friends getting kicked out of here and being gentrified, and it was like nobody was standing up, and I was like, man, this is San Francisco, like, you know, what's going on? And so I think, you know, as long as people are making art, it's going to be sort of a clarion call, right? Because art can kind of cut through a lot of barriers and make people feel. So, you know, I love this city. You know, I hate it sometimes too, but it's shaped me into who I am, coming here 25 years ago and reinventing myself. And I couldn't have done that if I stayed in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. So I just think artists are going to be really the fuel. Mm-hmm.
I want to add to that,
oh, I'm sorry.
Mark. I just want to say, like, you know, like artists in the way that are free and are able to say whatever they want because they're not really thinking about what they're getting back often. They can just like express, the freedom of expression is real in artists when we let them. So I think our role here is also like supporting artists and let them like really interpret in their vocabulary, which is often visual, sound, performance, what they're trying to get out. Artists are documenters, are researchers. Artists are, as Mark was saying, like they get more to the feeling, not like the head so much. In the world we currently operate, everything is in the head. Artists are, we're working with our ancestors, with our crafts, with our language that comes not from the spoken, but rather from like the making with the hands. So also art is like a healer. So I think right now, more than ever, that's what we need, like support artists that are like the vocabulary, the language, the healers, and the ones who are building community. And most artists are activists. They play both roles constantly. They're building community, they're supporting their community, and then like developing their own artistic practice. So I think like our role here is to support the artists, their voices, their language that goes all beyond generations and like any spoken language. You can have a kid reinterpret a piece of art and like 3 generations like difference will reinterpret differently. But I think that's the power of art. Like we can like do that and through expression. So I think as the Arts Commission, our goal is to support that.
You know, I see 2 great friends in this audience. I can't really say that we sit together periodically to help the city to run, but one of them is Deborah Walker, who almost every single day finds a new creative way of expressing their point of view. On a daily basis, I wait for that. I'm looking, as soon as they post something, I'm looking for it because there is a sign of dissent, but also in the color there's hope. I see that every day, and I wait for that and I watch for it. I have another friend who was here a little bit before that uses his voice and uses his ability for his advocacy to stand up for other artists in a collective way to make sure that choristers are heard in this city and that they're respected and that music has a value that we claim. You know, again, you know, one person referred to our ancestors. And I think our ancestors are always talking to us. They suffered so that we can be here. And what they had to do was way beyond what we could even have imagined. But they did it, and we're sitting here. I've often said to a lot of younger people that your greatest fears become your superpowers once you've mastered them. Once you've found your own voice. Once you've found your own authenticity. Nobody can take that superpower away from you. And it becomes a generational change. And once we put down some of these things in this generation, I can promise you that there's going to be a different foundation I have 2 grandsons that I'm raising in this city, and I'm raising them with our daughter and her husband and our family because we want them to be rooted in this community. We want them to know what it means to be a San Franciscan, really to hold that promise, that respect that you gain when you really stand up for some of the things that we really have done here. We're not without hope. We spend a lot of time thinking about our monuments and memorials. And right across the street, you can go and you can see Lava Thomas's beautiful work in honor of Maya Angelou. And this is a statement of not only praise, but also of dissent, because everything that Maya stands for is about what we're talking about. And she and Jimmy Baldwin were best friends. And so I think that, I don't leave things like this without a sense of hope. And I thank you for your question, because I think deep in our, humans are born to be creative. It's the love that we have as humans. It's the glue that we have in the universe. It's how we are connected to this great force. And so I would be optimistic. And I would say that it's going to be the creative energy of artists and how artists link with politicians and other people in the room together that we'll find our way out of this dilemma, because the opportunity is inside of this dilemma.
Thank you for that, Chuck. I mean, I think that if you're an artist, you can't help but do it. If you're an artist, if you're a real artist, you're not in it to be famous. You're not in it to be rich. You're not in it to be a global brand. You're in it because you're trying to comment on the world that you see around you and trying to affect change in that same way. If you're an artist, a real artist, in my opinion, that's what you're doing. And so now is the time for artists. Now is the time. This is the time to speak up, say whatever you need to say, disrupt the status quo, disrupt, disrupt, disrupt. That's what we have to do. Yes.
My name is Nancy Wong, and my organization is Ethnotech, and we're storytellers. And the Arts Commission has been wonderful in supporting my Strong Like Bamboo events. And that is when Asians come together, and I hire Asian American storytellers to talk about their racist experiences and how they came through it. But I'd like to take it beyond that now, and I really think that we need to have the Black community and the Latino community and the Asian community come together as a coalition, because I think, sure, we can take care of our own, but we have to go beyond that. But I think there's not a lot of trust yet. I don't know how we can get all those people together. Like on May 22nd, I have an event called We Rise Together. And it's for Latino and Asian and African American, people of color, LGBTQ, to come together with their stories and their music, and activists to come together and just share how beautiful we are and how our arts are important and how our arts can express what we need and what we want and what we see and that we're not getting. But I don't know how to bring them together, because I'm finding it difficult to I think there's some distrust still between groups. And if anywhere in this country.
So I would just say, who fosters that distrust should not be trusted. Who fosters that distrust should not be trusted.
So what is your suggestion then to be able to bring people together without that being a problem?
I think that there are wonderful examples in our city. I don't want to hog too much time about it, but we have a lot of apparatus. I mean, we have the Ethnic Dance Festival. We have other ways that we festivalize, or we tell stories, or we really share. Find some infrastructure that works. Now, I'm not actually debating, I'm not debating this with you. I'm simply saying, find examples that work. Build from a foundation, because the answers, I'll spend a lot of time as soon as this is over, because I don't buy into the narrative that we can't come together.
And on top of that, Chuck, I agree. I think that that's a modern take on where we are, but that's not where we are. If you look historically, history tells us, right? Historically, the civil rights movement, it was not only black folks, it was blacks, Latinos, Asians. I mean, everybody was in the civil rights. It wasn't just a black movement. White folks that were progressive white folks, Jewish community in the white folks, big time. So all of those things can happen again. You know, that's where we were founded. That's where the civil rights movement came from, that coalition building, multiracial coalition building. Paul, you have something?
I was just going to say, because I think it's true that, yes, we will not go back. But I like to give context to the conversation that we were just having. I think you all raised some really good points, specifically as we're talking about the arts and we're talking about, you know, I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation from the arts in the city and that we're having this. But again, I know I'm the lawyer and I like statistics and facts, but I think it's important for us to talk about these things so that we know them and we are armed with the knowledge about what we need to do and how we need to do it. Because I do believe that artists exist as advocates, that what they create and who they are, but we exist as advocates by showing up tonight for this conversation.
That's right.
We exist. My presence is resistance. My presence is advocacy, as is yours, but I like for it to be focused and shaped and informed and targeted. Because when we're talking about the arts, and again, like I mentioned before, we have some really amazing artists that are here in this room that you all have referenced. Where do we see their works? How do we see it? And the validation that we have built out through this society is to support those arts, and then we see them in our museums, or we support them ourselves. And that is where we have fallen off and where we still have so much further to go and to do. If you look at, I just published an essay on this, which is why you're about to hear it, but I feel really excited about this stuff. If you look at like the top museums in this country, in the United States, it is still 85.4% of all works that you see are heteronormative white men. In our museums that we pay for, that purport to be a reflection of who we are as a culture and who we are as a society. How is it that in these galleries we still only see 1.2% of the works are from African Americans? 2.8 are from Hispanic and Latinx communities. And when we're talking about the intersectionality between women and race, it's 0.05, not even 1% of public agencies. This is the challenge, but we can't fix what we're not talking about. You can't question how is it that we have a museum when we walk into it and over 87% of the works are from men. Why? These are the questions that we have to ask. And so as we celebrate the arts, as we celebrate culture, as we celebrate advocacy like this that we think is so important, we have to be asking ourselves, what is our role in that fourth estate? How do we invest in ourselves so that participating in activities like this is conflated into actions that make change for ourselves, but we can't change what we're not talking about. That's why I like to give the statistics and frame it so that people know what we are fighting against and people understand what we are fighting for and how others have fought and how we can continue to fight by using our voices to become more of the advocacy for the change that we want in this country and for the change that we want in our own communities. So again, I don't remember the question, but you know, I always have some stuff to say, and so I just think it's important that we talk about and we have a context of where we're trying to go. San Francisco has invested and poured into agencies like yours that are doing this work. If you want to ask yourselves, what can we be doing? These are the kinds of things that we can do. I don't go to a museum without asking, who are your curators? What artists do you have from women? What artists do you have from artists of color? Because that's what I'm here to see. And if you don't have that to show me, I want to have a conversation about it. I'm that angry guy that leaves notes everywhere. I know, it's who I am, but I think it's an important part of the conversation. We have a question.
So I just want to say how grateful I am to have the opportunity to be here with the panelists, but also this community. And I don't even know how I found out about this, but I told my husband, I'm coming down. I'm not exactly sure what this is, but I think I should go. And I guess what my question is like, who is not here? I'm so grateful that many seats are filled, but all of them should be filled. And who do we need to bring to, and I don't care, I mean, of course we care about race, but gender and race are important, but we need more people here. And we need, as you said, to have the conversation. And this is number 2 conversation. Number 3, when is it? And who needs to be included here?
We're all making a lot of money by having these conversations.
I was
Ralph,
going to say thank you for that, but
this is being broadcast.
yeah.
I wanted to say one thing to your point about what you're trying to do. And, art, a lot of art and a lot of good art is about being vulnerable. And so it's the old adage of, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And so I think also piggybacking off of your point about who's here is, being vulnerable to get out, go places, and like talk to people, like really go up and talk to people, and be genuine in your interest and your desire to connect, and it will happen. I mean, I have met a tremendous amount of people that I would have never thought I would have met because I went there with my artwork, because I just did. And it opened up so many doors. And so now it's something that I try to do semi-often,
And I will tell you an answer to that question. Who is not here? Your friends, your neighbors, your communities, the people that you care about and that see you. But the answer to that is that because you are here, you can take a picture tonight, right now, of the panel and tag it and say, you can take a picture and put in the link in your social media as an advertisement to the people around you that these are values and things that you care about and what you're doing. And even though they couldn't be here, they can see what you've been exposed to share some of your interests. And that's one of the ways that we make sure that these ideas get disseminated, that these conversations are taking place, and that we level set for what the next steps are from having conversations like this, which I think are super important.
That's true. What I was going to say in response to your query is that a couple things. So we had over 200 RSVPs. And this is who showed up, right? So there are people that intended to come, but you know what? You all are here, and that's what's important, right? And those people can come next time because we're going to keep on doing it. But you all are here, and you could have been anywhere tonight. You could have been, there's a million different things to do. There's 500 channels on TV. I mean, you could be anywhere in the world at any of these great world-class restaurants, in any of our world-class performance facilities and art facilities, but you chose to be here to have a civic conversation about government. And that's important. That means that something is happening. And already in this audience tonight, this is bigger than our first one. So I'm sure, right? So yeah, give yourselves a hand, for sure. Oh, no, I know. No, it's important what you're saying. It's important what you're saying. So I'm glad you gave us that platform to elevate this. So this is bigger than the first group. The next group, I'm sure, will be bigger than this one because the word gets out. And now that we're having this, and San Francisco Arts Commission wasn't doing this before. We weren't having these kind of convenings, so that's new too. So people have to get into the habit, know that we're doing this, know that we're here, knowing this is a place, a town square for people to have this conversation. And so once you get out, you spread the word, and as Paul said, tag it on your social media platforms, tag folks, tag the place. I see you have a question. Oh, okay, yeah. Why don't you go first?
So let's see, I have so much to say. My name is Chrissy Kiefer and I run Dance Mission and Dance Brigade, and I've been an artist for 50 years. I think it's really important not to glorify artists as being capable of transforming humanity. We participate, but we don't lead movements. Movements are made across a multiple amount of groups, and different groups at different times lead movements. We don't lead, we are participating. The other thing I want to say is most of the artists that I know are terrified right now because the money is drying up. I sit with artists. The Mellon Foundation is not funding. The Duke Foundation is not funding. The San Francisco Foundation is not funding. Everybody is changing their guidelines. It was diversity and equity and inclusion, and now they're going on and doing entirely different things. So people are really scared and don't know how they're going to pay their rent, much less lead a movement. The other thing that is really dividing our community is the assault on Gaza and the situation of the Palestinians and the demonization of people who are standing up in support and the people who are being deported right now as we're all watching the weaponization of anti-Semitism in order to silence all of us. The thing that also I think that we need to understand too is that in just the Ramaytush Aloni support statement, your land acknowledgement, is the very thing that Trump is trying to shut down, as well as these kind of discussions. This is the diversity, equity, inclusion. This is talking about the founding wounds of our country, which is what the Republican Party is trying to prevent us from talking about. So this is the contradiction we're up against. Right now, in order to get NEA funding, you cannot talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. But in order to get California Arts Council funding, you have to put a diversity, equity, inclusion on your website. So how are you all, as a panelist and the Arts Commission, going to help us negotiate that? Because if we do this, we also have to sign on to Trump's executive orders in order to get National Endowment for the Arts, and where does that land you? But also, we really need to know how we're supposed to deal with the fact that all of our websites have these big, bold statements on them that talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're part of the California Arts Council requirement. Question, that was a question.
Thank you. I get really excited. This makes me really happy. I love when people get excited. Girl, you jump up here on this panel too and start talking. I will say, and I want Ralph to jump in, because the Arts Commission has such a rich history of doing exactly this, of navigating exactly this. And his leadership is the right person at the right time, because the things that you have just raised are exactly the conflicts that San Francisco is not alone. San Francisco is not unique in the context of trying to navigate the conflicts inherent in the executive orders and the restriction of funds at the federal level, which are counterintuitive to the requirements at a state and at a local level. And I think it is requiring all of us to look deeper and in other and in new areas to maintain our commitment to a definition of culture. I will say that that is not all of the answer. We can't sit back with our concerns and take a precatory approach to what the Arts Council is going to do in terms of funding and helping to get all of this done. They're not going to be able to carry the ball over the finish line by themselves. I would say that the real answer lies in what Chuck Collins was talking about, which is that fourth estate, which is all of us. How are we individually going to make a commitment to making sure that arts are supported equitably and arts are supported in ways that we can do things by buying original art, by advertising and telling people when we know about events that are coming up? I know you just talked about your event. How do we support that with our presence? How do we conflate that with the organizations that we cross-pollinate because we're active in a political club? because we are active in an after-school club that supports our children, those kinds of things, where we're talking about how important it is that we talk about the arts, that we support the arts, that we support specific artists. How many artists do you know offhand? Have you checked on those artists to see? When you see that they are selling their works, do you make it available through your own social media to let people know what's available? This is one of those perfect opportunities because I always feel like everybody can come up with the answer for themselves. I show Mark's work in my agency every single day just because I can, so people can see the work and let them know. Let me tell you about this artist. Let me tell you where this work is available. And I only say that as an example because I do think that the solution is for us to take individual ownership of these things, and that's not the only answer. I'm just saying it puts, I think, a lot on Ralph, and he's going to answer the question and tell you about the millions of dollars that he's going to give and figure out and fix everything.
Thanks, Paul.
It's a big ratio.
I'll jump in just to say, just really quickly, because I know we have a couple more questions from the audience, and we only have a little bit more time. So I just will say this, that I was director of theater and musical theater at the National Endowment for the Arts for about 4 years, and in DC, and I've been talking with the National Endowment for the Arts and the folks there for the last 3 weeks, and it's like a funeral over there, and they are really demoralized and debilitated. They're doing the best they can, but what I will say is this very quickly is that from what I understand, and it shifts every day, it shifts every hour, right? Let's be honest. Every hour there's something new, some new regulation, some new guidelines, some new prohibition of against some new something. But with where I last checked it, they're wanting they're wanting applicants to uphold the Declaration of Independence or the values in the Declaration of Independence. Well, bet. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing here tonight. I mean, we're talking about the Constitution, which is different than Declaration of Independence, because contrary to popular belief, the word equity or equality was never mentioned in the Constitution until the Reconstruction Amendments, until what we're talking about tonight. They weren't mentioned. Equity, equality was not a part of the Constitution of the United States. That was in the Declaration of Independence, but not the Constitution. So the fact that the National Endowment for the Arts wants us to uphold the values of the Declaration of Independence, well, that's just opened the door to equity by another name. So I would lean into that. I would lean into that. Take what they give you and figure out what's between the lines and then work with that. All right, I know I have a question here and a question here. So I'm gonna get to you.
Thank you. My name is Soumya. I feel like every day I'm just walking and thinking of this line between an artist and activist's role as an educator and this institution's desire to overwhelm us into inaction. And I mean, that's probably a deeper manifestation of my own conflicts because I'm like an artist, I'm a singer and a poet, but I also go to law school around the corner. So I feel like we've talked about these calls of like healer versus fighter. And I guess my question, you guys have more wisdom than me. So just that line between amplification versus overwhelm, if you have any advice for like how I can be thinking about that. Yeah.
Advice on, what was it again, versus overload? What was the other
I
one?
feel like I should be saying and doing things, but I also don't want to take, it's like, how much is my place to say? I don't want to say too much. I also want to, like, for example, if I'm going to post things on my social media, I will often try to package it in music that is healing to my soul in that moment. Like, I feel like I'm doing all this mental gymnastics, but also I just know that I don't want to be saying so much that people just turn their phones off or like stop looking at my page, period.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, you know, my work changed when Michael Brown got murdered because it had to, right? I couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore and see what was happening in my community. And so I started doing that work just for myself. I was an abstract painter. I wasn't going to put it out. And I did. I was reluctant to, and I think this goes back to the vulnerability aspect, because I was being true to myself. I was doing what I needed to do for myself. that I found that it connected me with others. And people responded and told me what they were getting from seeing my work, because I was bringing something to life that they couldn't articulate. They felt it, but they couldn't articulate it. And then they saw a certain piece and they're like, oh, wow, I get it. I would say, you know, what anybody else thinks about you is none of your business, right? So, I mean, this is what I mean about being an artist. I mean, I'm much more flippant about what people think about me than I've ever been in my life. And, you know, you're gestating.
Mark, let me add something here, you know, through a lens of history. Right? Emmett Till was murdered in 1955, right? Rosa Parks got on a bus with 4 other women. In her memoirs, she says that she stayed in her seat in memory of Emmett Till. She didn't wake up that morning to be a heroine or a hero or a shero. She woke up to go to work. But in her consciousness was the bigger framework. This boy had died. He had been murdered. And she was not going to get up, not because she was tired or all the other memes or narratives. It was because she was standing in that moment for him. And she knew that the sacrifice that she could make as a human on that bus was in honor of him. I would simply say that we never know our moment of calling. Yeah. We have to stay awake to our times. Don't fret over, you know, those things, because in some ways, they're just dribbling on the basketball court. But keep dribbling, stay awake. And this act of thank you for all being here, this is an act of being awake. And it's through that awakening that we have that we will find our moments. I agree with you. We cannot put all of this on artists. But the term that I was using was our creativity, because not many of us have the ability to be an artist. That is a very high calling. But we all have this ability in that moment to figure out what is the moment of our truth in that moment. And you will find it, we find it. And I think it's surprising because it's always waiting to be found. It's just on the doorstep.
And I want to add something to that. Just also a reminder that part of the strategy of the system is to make you feel overwhelmed. As a woman of color, who like historically are like all our ancestors have been fighting, getting tired, getting overwhelmed. It's not by like, you know, it's part of it. So the moments that you feel that, also think of that and what you need to do for yourself.
Yeah, getting it out is crucial.
Self-care.
To get it out.
Well, hi everybody, my name is Verena, and as many of you, I'm very grateful and happy to be here, and I want to express my gratitude for each one of you and the panelists having the courage to speak up, but as well each one of you being here tonight, listening and using your voice. So I don't know if I have a question though, but there were like so many very valuable speeches and comments and inputs that made me really think and immerse into my own experience through that. So I work in the arts, but as well in the healing arts. I volunteer as well in prison, level 2 prison in Soledad every Monday. Those people, yes, have been suppressed, outcast of society, totally oblivious to their pain, their story, and what actually brought them to where they are, to a degree that they started to believe that they're really unworthy, like at all costs. Yet, many of them have made the decision to not buy into that and go with their own truth to better whatever toxicity has entered them, transformed them, and put it into something good. They hold so much wisdom and so much love and so much good just because they made the decision to do that against all odds. And I feel our ancestors have made the same decisions. It doesn't matter where you come from or what's happening, but you hold a truth within you and you make that decision and you follow that decision. And I think artists are doing the same thing. It's just they have hit a point where they feel like, fuck it. It's like, I cannot survive in this environment anymore, and I don't want to. And I feel like we are heading into times where more and more people, and I agree, it cannot be solely put on artists, but I feel like more and more people are going to hit that point where they feel like, I cannot do this anymore. And I feel like, Carolina, I think that's such an important point that you said. It's the purpose to make you feel overwhelmed. And I think it's a purpose as well to take away our power of making that decision by paralyzing us through submission. And I think I just want to encourage everybody here to not let that get to you. Because the more suppression and the more rights that will be taken away from us, it's very easy to, when it really hits real life. Like when laws are going to be installed that hit our real life, that make us feel vulnerable, powerless, and lost. We cannot lose the strength to make the decision that this is wrong. And I think that is very important. That should give us back that power. And I feel like more and more people are going to hit that point. And I think this is so important that the Arts Commission is going to keep doing that and invite really everybody, because more and more people are going to feel it. And I think one point when we think about what can we do is to come together to strengthen us in this decision of truth. No matter what happens, I have the right to live a decent life, no matter whatever says contrary. So I just want to thank everybody who is here really deeply, because I think you already made that decision, whether you're an artist or not. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think, we have, according to my phone, I'm supposed to start wrapping up comments right now and start saying goodbye to folks. So first of all, I just want to say, I don't need both of these. I just want to say, actually, I don't need any of them, but I just want to say thank you to the panelists, my co-moderator, Paul Henderson, who's always amazing. Thank you, Paul. And thank you to all the panelists who are here tonight. And thank you, last but not least, thank you to all of you. We had an artist in the front row who was actually doing art right in front of us. That was pretty cool.
And musicians in the room too.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you guys coming. Like I said, you could have been anywhere tonight, and you chose to come here and spend your evening with us. I don't know if I can read. Oh, yeah, and thank you to the virtual audience, I guess. So that's what Chuck is asking me to do. So thank the virtual audience. And I would say, and anybody that will stream this, thank you for streaming and watching it after the fact. Carolina, you want to say something?
I want to add, if you can join me with a big round of applause for Destiny Mohammed. amazing musician, harpist, and amazing artist. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Destiny. Really appreciate your artistry every time. So, and thank you, and please come back. We are, like I said, our future panels will be on the ERA, the Civil Rights Act, the Second Amendment. So we have some juicy topics coming up. Now that you know what the format's like, you know, you can come with your questions next time and engage and as you want to, and partake in food. You don't have to eat before you come, because as you see, we have food. So please avail yourself of any food that we have left. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.